Thank you, Quentin. So to begin our panel, we have Ruby Edlin and Derek Tisler joining us from the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU. Derek Tisler is counsel and Ruby Edlin is the advocacy campaign coordinator at the Brennan Center for Justice's Elections and Government Program. Derek and Ruby are national experts in election administration and security, working with public leaders across the country to build a more resilient election process that protects the rights of all voters.
Thanks so much, Ella. I will get us started. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what misinformation and rumors about elections look like right now, as that's one of the biggest threats to election security. Thanks, Ella. So I'll first talk about what part of what makes a rumor stick around, why people believe it, why it gets recirculated. So a rumor can stick around because of its relevance to current events and also based on the significance or impact of the rumors. So when it comes to elections, most of these rumors actually have very high stakes attached to them because elections are a big deal. People's lives really change based on the outcome of the presidential election. And when this is looped into current events, the rumor can feel even more urgent, newsy. It has breaking in capital letters at the beginning of it. And a rumor is also more likely to be believed the more that it's been heard. And so people who spread lies about elections know that recycling the same core elements over and over again, it's usually about something like rigged machines or ineligible voters voting, makes the overall story that they're trying to sell, that elections can't be trusted, more plausible because it makes the audience think, oh, I keep hearing about this. There must be some grain of truth to it. And so, in order to capitalize on making rumors stick around because of their relevance to current events, they often change based on where we are in the voting process. So, for example, during registration, we've heard a lot of rumors about non-citizens being registered to vote. During the voting process, you'll hear about machines being hacked, maybe multiple absentee ballots being sent to one address. And then during the certification process, and the vote counting process, you'll hear something about ballot dumps and the results changing very quickly as evidence of something nefarious being afoot. And I'll go to the next slide. Thanks, Ella. So when does this false information become illegal? So the Voting Rights Act outlaws voter intimidation broadly, which is defined as attempting to intimidate, threaten, or coerce any person for voting or attempting to vote. There's also federal law that bars conspiracies to deprive Americans of the right to vote. So, depending on the circumstance, if you spread intentionally false information about when, how, or where to vote, like misinformation about what time polls open or where the polling location is, you can run afoul of this law. That includes false information that's being spread online. The First Amendment sets a pretty high bar for speech being illegal, so it can be hard to clear that bar. But the next slide, I have one example. It's a pretty rare example of this being done. So last year, a social media influencer was convicted of election interference that took place back in 2016. He promoted messages online that told Black voters that they could cast ballots online or by phone, which obviously wasn't true. And that included a fake advertisement. So this is someone who actually was convicted for spreading false information about elections online. Like I said before, it can be hard to charge someone with this because of the First Amendment, but it has been done before. And I'll pass it to Derek, talk about election officials.
Thanks, Ruby. I wanted to talk quickly about the people who run elections and really how their jobs have been impacted by disinformation. And in the process, give you all some things to consider when working with election officials and your voter protection roles. So to start, who are local election officials? As you all may know, elections in the US are heavily decentralized. They're run by more than 10,000 local election officials nationwide. These are typically county officials, but in some states like Michigan, Wisconsin, some of the New England states, it's actually run at the town or municipal level. It may also be split across different levels of government. It may be a single official or a bipartisan board of officials who work together to run elections or to perform a specific purpose in the election process. Nearly two-thirds of local election officials are elected, and the other third are appointed. And then importantly, nearly half of all election offices have one or fewer full-time staff, and nearly a third have no full-time staff at all. And when you look at this image that I included here to the right, you kind of see what's going on in election administration. Because it is run at the local level, the vast majority of local election offices serve just a tiny fraction of voters. These are, rural counties, not that many people live there. And on the flip side, just 8% of local election officials serve 75% of voters because most voters live in some of the biggest counties across the country, right? And so when you look at these different staffing levels, it's really that top group that I'm talking about. They have very, very little full-time capacity and expertise when running elections. Next slide. Partisanship plays a role in the election administration process, but it looks differently depending on what state that you're in. So in some cases, local political parties may have the power to appoint or nominate members to election administration boards or a canvassing board, the board that's actually in charge of overseeing how votes are counted. That's a smaller number of states. Much more common, local political parties can recruit and appoint poll workers, or recruit and appoint poll watchers or poll observers. The map here shows that in the vast majority of states, there's some sort of partisan parity requirement in the state, so that the intent is to guarantee that the two largest political parties are represented among poll workers in each polling location to have a little bit more checks and balances at those voting locations. And then, importantly, some of the challenges that election officials are facing since 2020. So, one is decreased funding, especially from the federal level. We've seen about $1 billion less in federal funding for elections leading up to 2024 than we saw leading up to 2020. We're seeing really high turnover in local election offices with a lot of experienced officials retiring because of some of these other challenges or just from exhaustion after the 2020 election. We're seeing a large spike in threats and harassment, with more than 1 in 3 local election officials having experienced threats, harassment, or abuse because of their jobs and because of disinformation about how they perform their jobs. We're seeing a rise in partisan interference. Some of this new bills passed in states that may put in place tighter requirements or even criminal penalties for various aspects of election work. But we've also seen investigations launched because of certain actions that election officials have taken, or maybe groups that they have worked with in the process. And then, of course, what we're talking about here with disinformation, it is impacting election officials as much as anyone. They're being questioned by members of their own community about how they do their job, being called traitors, and generally just subject to lies about the responsibilities that they have. Next slide. So all this leads to some takeaways that I wanted to offer when you're working with election officials in your voter protection roles, including when you are seeing disinformation about the voting process in the states that you're working in. So a few takeaways. One, understand capacity constraints. Again, election offices often don't have a lot of staff capacity. They may not be able to monitor everything, and they may not be able to respond to things in a timely manner. Reach out and introduce yourself and provide contact information. I think this really goes a long way, again, in this hostile environment. If you sort of make clear who you are, you're a member of that community, and here's the job that you're hoping to perform. If there are any issues with me or the group I'm working with, here's how you can contact us. Respect poll workers' authority. Again, there's a lot of rising tensions in polling places. If there are guidelines about where you can stand as an observer, things that you're allowed to do, please be respectful in the process. It'll go a long way towards a more healthy relationship there between observers and poll workers. Amplify authoritative voices of information. Election officials are going to be the people who best understand the election process in their own community. When you're seeing misinformation spread, if you see your local election official, offering true information about how the process actually works, do your best to amplify that information. That way you can ensure that you're getting the information correct and that there's some message consistency going to voters. And that leads to the last point, take time to get the information right. A lot of information can fly fast, and especially with some of the risks that we're going to talk about in this webinar, make sure you understand what is actually going on. And if you have questions about the process, again, reach out to those authoritative voices.